Tonight, we're stepping into the hollow quiet beneath an unfinished river bridge, the kind of colossal promise that once shimmered across campaign posters and economic forecasts, only to end here, mid-air, mid-span, mid-story. You feel the night air shift as you walk across the cold concrete slab, the rebar stubble catching moonlight like an unshaven jaw. Below you, the river moves with patient indifference as though it has spent decades outwaiting plans like this. Floodlights left behind by contractors still cling to rusting poles, their cords curled like sleeping snakes. This is where your journey starts, not with triumph, but with the echo of what could have been. Most people have no idea how many towns spent decades waiting for projects that never arrived. That's the wry truth lodged in your first steps across this broken promise, an almost comic mismatch between the size of the dreams and the size of the bureaucratic inboxes that swallowed them. Somewhere upstream, a lone barge horn groans, and you're not sure whether it's complaining or laughing. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Let's begin. You step closer to the edge where the bridge abruptly ends, like a sentence cut off mid-syllable. The construction halted in the late 1990s, an era remembered with a strange mix of booming optimism and political gridlock, a mainstream historical fact. Those were the years when the federal government pushed hard for infrastructure expansion while simultaneously wrestling with balanced budget ambitions. The result was a tug-of-war that left many megaprojects dangling, including this river crossing that was supposed to connect two states with a clean sweep of economic opportunity. But opportunities don't cross rivers on intentions. You move toward the central support tower, its cables still coiled in giant spools never lifted into the air. A quirky detail catches your eye. Someone painted a tiny mural on the concrete wall just inside the unfinished maintenance bay. It shows a cartoon beaver wearing a hard hat and giving a double thumbs up. The style suggests an early 2000s safety campaign, the kind that tried very hard to be cute and very rarely succeeded. The little beaver seems determined, though, forever optimistic, forever unused. A faint breeze rolls through the structure, channeled by the angles of the bridge like a giant, half-built instrument. You walk along the narrow catwalk where crews once hauled gear at dawn. There's a thermos left on a bent metal shelf, still capped, dented, coated in dust. It sits exactly where a worker set it down more than 20 years ago. You can almost imagine his shift whistle still ringing, except no whistle ever came. The funding suspension hit on a Thursday, midweek, when the ledger didn't quite add up and the cost-risk analysis grew teeth. Workers were told they'd return Monday. Monday never came. Experts still disagree whether this halt was driven more by political posturing or by genuine fiscal fear. Some scholars argue that the cost projections were sabotaged by unrealistic early estimates, a classic megaproject pitfall recognized worldwide. Others insist the delay was essentially a political negotiation tactic that backfired when public patience evaporated. You hear those arguments in the distance like faint academic voices on the wind, each one convinced it sees the truth more clearly than the others. Below, the river smells of silt and rain-soaked wood. You lean over the guardrail to look at the foundation pillars, the ones actually completed before the stoppage. Their surfaces show the creeping signatures of time, algae growing in long green strokes, cracks filled with spiderweb-like minerals. A few yards downriver, you barely catch sight of an older stone pier from a 19th century ferry landing, reminding you of the long lineage of attempts to span this same stretch of water. It's a subtle callback to the human stubbornness embedded in this landscape. We keep trying to cross, no matter how many times the planning falters. A soft clatter draws your attention, a loose bolt rolling slowly across the concrete as if nudged by the night itself. You pause long enough to let its tiny metallic scrape fade into the dark. Another wry observation slips into your thoughts. Mega projects may collapse under billions of dollars in complications, but it's always the spare parts that seem to stick around longest. You push farther along the deck, your footsteps echoing off silence. The air smells faintly of oil, ancient, oxidized, baked into the girders. It's as if the bridge itself has been holding its breath for 2 decades, unsure whether to wait for redemption or surrender to ruin. A crane you noticed briefly at the start reappears in your path now, its boom frozen mid-rise. The machinery looks like a dinosaur skeleton, ribs of metal, teeth of gears, spine of hydraulic arms. It was once the heartbeat of the entire operation. Now, it's a monument to suspended ambition. A historical marker stands crooked near the median, describing the project's groundbreaking ceremony in the mid-90s. You read the weathered text, imagining the officials who held gold shovels for the cameras, proudly declaring that this bridge would symbolize a new era of regional cooperation. The American spirit of construction was strong in those years, emboldened by a century of freeway building, dam raising, and power grid expansion. It was easy, perhaps dangerously easy, to believe that America could simply will an engineering marvel into existence. But mega projects don't bend to optimism alone. They bend to budgets, geology, political cycles, and, more unpredictably, public patience. On the beam beside the marker, someone scratched initials and a date, JS plus MK 2004, then a tiny arrow pointing toward the river. Lovers, maybe, or 2 workers who returned long after the shutdown to leave a small mark on something the world forgot. Another wry detail: people tend to leave names on structures they believe will last. But no one writes on ghosts expecting permanence. As you approach the far end where construction never began, the surface becomes rougher, sprinkled with gravel, abandoned equipment tags, and a tangle of plastic netting that once marked off hazardous areas. You lift a corner of the netting, its texture brittle, sun-bleached into frailty. Underneath lies a discarded blueprint sleeve, empty now but still crisp around the edges. You pick it up and picture the plans that once lived inside. Elegant, confident lines, careful load calculations, the mathematical poetry of structural engineering. Plans are always perfect before reality enters the room. The night deepens. The unfinished span seems to grow larger, as though absorbing your presence into its hollow chest. You take one last look across the river toward the skeletal crane you passed earlier. Its shadow stretches over the deck like a reminder. Beginnings are easy. Staying the course is the hard part. This is where your journey into America's abandoned megaprojects truly begins, balanced between ambition and stillness, hope and corrosion. Human dreams and the structures they leave behind. You leave the half-formed bridge behind and follow a narrow access road that winds into the trees, the asphalt cracked like old porcelain. The night softens into a muted gray as the first hint of morning filters between branches. You walk toward a line of pink survey stakes rising from the underbrush, little neon exclamation points marking where optimism once touched the soil. This corridor was supposed to be the approach route, the graceful arc of highway feeding travelers toward the span you just crossed. Instead, it's a trail of abandoned intentions swallowed by a patient forest. The stakes appear in clusters at first, then in long regimented rows, lingering like the skeletal remains of a once hopeful geometry. Each one was hammered in with confidence, engineers mapping gradients, drainage patterns, and load-bearing soil with a kind of backstage precision. You imagine the crews in reflective vests setting up their tripods, calling out measurements, brushing gnats from their eyes. Back then, the project brimmed with promise. The environmental impact statement had been approved, the interstate designation secured, and the governors from both states delivered speeches about regional renewal. Anyone standing where you stand now would have pictured trucks roaring through by 2008. A wry observation nudges in. Survey flags always look cheerful, as if they're celebrating something rather than simply announcing a bureaucratic intention to move dirt. But here, they're like confetti thrown for a parade that never marched. You continue deeper into the woods, following an overgrown path where tire tracks once ran. The soil dips and rises under your boots, soft with years of leaf fall. Ahead, you see a strip of cleared land, an early grading cut made before the project stalled. The slope is smooth, unnervingly precise, the kind of line nature never draws. Saplings now poke through its symmetry like rebellious punctuation marks. You step onto it, and suddenly the forest sound changes. It's quieter here, as though the land itself remembers the disruption. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your thoughts. During the early 2000s, many federally supported megaprojects shifted toward public-private partnerships, pushing local governments to shoulder more responsibility than ever before. Some communities embraced that model, others recoiled, fearing corporate overreach or future tolls. This corridor became an ideological fault line, supporters calling it economic oxygen, opponents calling it an unnecessary scar across rural land. The argument grew louder each year until the bulldozers stopped altogether. Ahead, you notice a weathered plywood sign leaning against a stump. The faded lettering reads, "Future Transportation Corridor," in a font that tries desperately to sound authoritative. Below it, someone graffitied a small raccoon wearing sunglasses, a lesser-known detail locals still laugh about, claiming a bored teenager created an unofficial mascot for the project's stalled fate. The cool raccoon, as residents nicknamed it, ended up on homemade protest stickers long after the funding dried up. Your path curves toward a cluster of rusted metal stakes and a collapsed equipment tent. You crouch beside a plastic survey disc half buried under pine needles, its concentric ridges still crisp as if waiting to be read again. Touching it feels like tapping into a paused story. The early field engineers who set these markers believed the corridor would be paved within 2 years. Their notebooks, archived now in a county building, show tidy sketches and meticulous optimism, rarely acknowledging the political headwinds gathering in the state capital. Experts still debate whether opposition from local landowners or the shifting federal cost-sharing formula dealt the hardest blow. Some scholars insist the timeline collapsed when new environmental assessments were mandated after a rare species of cave beetle was discovered a few miles from here. Others argue the beetle became a convenient scapegoat for officials who were already wary of ballooning expenses. You walk through this landscape like someone hearing multiple conflicting narrators, each one certain, each one incomplete. You step over a fallen tree trunk and emerge into a broad clearing. Morning light spills across a stretch of open earth where bulldozers once carved the early highway footprint. The grading is unmistakable, a long, shallow bowl cutting cleanly through the forest. Now it's filled with tall grasses, wildflowers, and a surprising number of dragonflies skimming the surface. Their metallic wings flicker as they weave through the air, lending a strange, celebratory energy to a place defined by delay. Another wry detail surfaces. The natural world, completely unaware of budget hearings, always finds a way to treat abandoned megaprojects as luxury real estate. You walk along the center of the clearing, feeling the faint camber beneath your feet, the engineered slope designed to shed rainwater to the sides. Even after years of neglect, the subtle shape remains, like a ghost of the future road. At the far end stands a row of massive drainage culverts stacked neatly but never installed. Their circular mouths gape toward you like a row of silent, expectant faces. You run your hand along the corrugated steel, cold, dimpled, surprisingly sturdy. These were meant to guide runoff beneath the highway, protecting the surrounding wetlands. Now, they're monuments to the careful calculations that never got to prove themselves. Beside the culverts sits a stack of geotextile rolls, their plastic wrapping shredded by weather. You unspool a bit of fabric, feeling its gritty texture. It's the kind of material designed to last decades underground, but ironically, frays quickly when left exposed. A perfect metaphor. Another wry voice whispers, built for endurance, but undone by waiting. Near the far edge of the site, you discover a portable office trailer tipped slightly to one side. Its aluminum siding is battered, and the steps have collapsed, but the door still creaks open with a reluctant groan. You step inside. Dust swirls in the dim light filtering through a broken window. Architectural renderings lie curled on the floor, their corners brittle. A whiteboard still shows a faded grid of tasks. Soil tests, utility mapping, wetland mitigation, each with a nearly erased checkmark beside it. Someone took the time to nearly finish erasing, then stopped, leaving behind the faint outline of effort. A binder sits on a chair, its cover labeled Preliminary Alignment, Phase A. You flip through the pages. Inside are precise cross-sections, slope diagrams, and notations in neat handwriting. A coffee stain spreads across one page, the irregular shape suggesting a startled interruption, perhaps the moment the project meeting was called off. You trace the watermark with your finger and feel the weight of that unspoken disappointment. When you step back outside, the sun has risen fully. Its warmth pools across the clearing, and for a moment the corridor feels alive again, like a stage waiting for actors who never arrived. You survey the forest edges, the engineered cut in the land, the forgotten equipment. Everything here carries the same unfinished cadence, the first act of a story the nation walked away from. You follow the staking line back toward the trees. The forest greets you with birdsong, a reminder that it never stopped moving forward even when the project didn't. You look down at one last survey marker, its pink flag faded to a soft peach. You imagine the engineer who placed it tapping it into the soil with quiet confidence. That gesture, simple, methodical, hopeful, still lingers here long after the machines left. The stakes guide you toward the path that will eventually lead to the next broken piece of the megaproject. As branches brush your arms, you glance back and catch sight of the corridor one last time, a clean cut through the wild, now softened, reclaimed, and strangely beautiful in its incompleteness. Promise poured into concrete ends here, dissolving into soil and memory. But its echo follows you as you continue through the forest toward what stalled next. You emerge from the thinning tree line into a wide gravel expanse that feels abandoned mid-breath, as though the land itself still expects the work crews to return. Ahead rises the twisted geometry of a half-built interchange, looping ramps that lead nowhere, concrete abutments stranded in open air, and a scatter of orange barrels bleached nearly white by the sun. Morning light cuts long shadows across the site, turning every unfinished structure into a monument of decisions paused in motion. The air smells faintly of diesel, though no engines have run here in years. At your feet, weeds push through the gravel in determined little clumps, botanical insurgents making their slow, persistent claim. You step toward the central overpass where rebar sticks out from the concrete like wiry hairs. Far above, steel girders meet at angles that once promised a seamless highway junction. Now they cling to each other like dancers frozen mid-lift. A wry note drifts into your thoughts. Megaprojects tend to stop with startling neatness, as if someone simply pressed pause on a giant invisible remote. The equipment vanishes almost instantly, but the anticipation stays behind, etched into every unfinished surface. You walk beneath a ramp where wooden formwork still clings to the underside of the concrete. Each plank is warped by weather, its nails rusted to orange freckles. The pattern of leftover impressions, grain textures, alignment lines, the subtle indentation of screw heads creates a ghostly record of the last week of work before everything halted. You run your hand along the rough surface, feeling each tiny detail like braille. A mainstream historical fact rises as you step into the shadow of the interchange. During the mid-2000s, federal transportation appropriations were repeatedly entangled in political battles over earmarks. Dozens of state projects stalled when promised funds were diverted, frozen, or reallocated under shifting reform campaigns. The interchange you stand beneath became a casualty of those battles, its timeline stretched, then snapped, by the tide of appropriations that never materialized. You climb a small embankment where a temporary path still winds upward, designed originally for workers moving between ramps. The earth is firm but uneven, and the metal mesh erosion netting crunches softly beneath your boots. At the top, you reach a flat construction deck overlooking the whole interchange. From here, the aborted loops form an uneasy symmetry, concrete arms raised in surrender. A pile of unused Jersey barriers sits stacked like dominoes, waiting for a hand that never returned. A flutter of movement catches your eye near the edge of the deck. A family of field mice scurries between the barriers, vanishing into a crack in the concrete. A lesser-known detail, wildlife biologists who surveyed this site years ago noted that several small species actually flourished in the stalled construction zone, taking advantage of the artificial shelters and warm microclimates created by exposed steel. The report included an unexpectedly enthusiastic footnote describing the excellent mouse habitat potential. One imagines the biologist writing it with a mix of delight and professional restraint. Your gaze shifts toward a cluster of porta-johns far below, still standing, still locked, still aligned in a row, like soldiers who never received their discharge papers. One is knocked slightly askew, and you remember walking past similar forgotten facilities at the bridge site earlier. The continuity feels almost eerie, as though the halted project left behind a series of rituals no one finished tidying up. A gust of wind whistles through the rebar skeleton above you, producing a faint, dissonant hum. It's the kind of accidental music construction sites often create, but here it takes on the tone of something unresolved. You look up at the pier caps, smooth concrete blocks where future beams would have rested. The surfaces remain clean, as though waiting to be touched by work that never came. Experts still debate what truly triggered the funding freeze that shut this interchange down. Some argue it was the sharp spike in steel prices during the mid-2000s, which sent cost estimates spiraling beyond what state budgets could absorb. Others maintain the real culprit was a political stalemate between regional planning agencies, each trying to shift financial responsibility onto the other. A few scholars point to an obscure policy dispute over congestion metrics, a mundane technicality that, according to their view, became a catastrophic domino. Listening to those debates feels like walking through layers of sediment, each version of the truth settling on top of another, compressing, distorting, preserving fragments while obscuring the whole. You descend a sloping path toward the unfinished central pillar rising from a dry basin. At the base, graffiti spreads in swirling colors, some of it elaborate murals, some of it simple initials carved with pocket knives. One tag shows a cartoon snail wearing a construction helmet. Its speech bubble reads, "We'll get there eventually." You can't help the wry smile that surfaces. Humor blooms wherever patience died. The basin itself was meant to be a retention area for stormwater. Now it's a shallow meadow dotted with tall reeds and the bright yellow faces of volunteer wildflowers. A few wooden pallets lie half buried near the center. You step across the reeds, feeling the ground squish slightly underfoot. The soil here remembers a different plan. Engineered drainage patterns, sediment control strategies, and the quiet calculations of hydrologists. But water never flowed the way it was meant to. Nothing was finished enough for those systems to activate. You climb the opposite slope and reach a fenced-off equipment yard. The chain link sits askew, sagging under its own fatigue. Inside are the remnants of the construction crew's final days. Spool racks holding the last coils of fiber conduit, battered toolboxes with their lids open, and an excavator bucket left detached and propped upright like a ceremonial relic. A few laminated safety posters flap lazily on the fence, their edges curled by years of weather. One reads, "Safety is a journey," which feels unintentionally ironic here. A row of metal shipping containers stands beyond the yard, their doors locked with rusted padlocks. You peer through the slits of one container's vents and see the shadows of unused rebar cages stacked inside. The air smells faintly metallic. Dust, steel, the ghost of construction. A broken tape measure lies under your boot, its numbers barely visible on the faded yellow strip. You pick it up and let the metal curl back into its housing with a soft snap. The gesture echoes strangely loud in the quiet. Moving on, you follow a narrow catwalk that clings to the side of a barely started ramp. The walkway vibrates faintly with each step, but it holds. From this height, the interchange spreads out like a half-sketched diagram. You can see the path through the forest where you walked earlier, and even the direction of the river bridge in the distance, a faint metallic glint through the trees. The pieces of the project reveal themselves as a fractured constellation, each abandoned star once intended to align. When you reach the end of the catwalk, you encounter a concrete block stamped with a date, 06 on 14 as 07. The numbers stand crisp and sharp, This block was poured on the very day the freeze order went out. You picture the crew learning the news just hours later, their tools still in hand. Some of them reportedly returned that evening to collect personal items. Others left quickly, believing the shutdown would last a week. That week became forever. A final wry detail emerges as you step back. Several state audits show that one of the last expenses paid for this project was a large order of high-visibility vests. Safety for a future that never arrived. You stand amid the silent ramps, the halted pillars, the loops that never looped. The interchange feels like a crossroads not only of roads, but of intentions. Human, political, economic. The day the money stopped didn't just pause construction, it paused momentum, imagination, and the belief that forward motion was inevitable. You breathe in the still air and start walking again, ready to follow the next thread in this unraveling mega project. You leave the silent interchange behind, stepping onto a maintenance road that curls downward toward a cluster of low rectangular structures at the valley's edge. From a distance, they resemble a row of shipping containers left to rust. But as you approach, their true purpose becomes clearer. These were the field offices, the temporary command posts where engineers compared notes, reviewed revised schematics, argued over soil data, and once believed they could solve anything with enough rebar and determination. The first office sits slightly tilted, its foundation sunken on one side as if weighed down by unspoken decisions. The aluminum siding is chalky beneath your fingers, and a faded project logo, two swooping lines meant to symbolize connectivity, peels away like molting skin. You push open the door. It resists for a moment, then releases a breath of hot, stagnant air, heavy with dust and old adhesive. Inside, the light is thin, filtered through blinds stuck in a permanent half-open squint. You can see the whole room in a glance. Dented desks, mismatched chairs, a row of filing cabinets leaning like tired old men, and curling blueprints spread across a long conference table. These plans were left behind the day the work crews were told to pack up. But the paperwork remained, frozen mid-thought, mid-calculation, mid-disagreement. A wry detail. Megaproject paperwork never truly dies. It just waits quietly for someone to blame. You walk toward the table, brushing aside a brittle coffee cup ringed with an archaeological layer of dust. Beneath it lies a blueprint labeled Alignment Revision, Option C, its paper yellowed at the edges. The lines are crisp, elegant, the geometry of ambition rendered in ink. A few handwritten notes mark the margins. Check load factor assumptions. Compare geotech from mile 14, and a small doodle of a bridge tower wearing sunglasses. Engineers, it seems, also cope with delays through questionable humor. You pick up one of the rolled plans and feel the dried stiffness of the paper. When you unroll it, a neat cross-section of a future overpass reveals itself. Rebar densities, shear walls, seismic allowances. The kind of drawing that whispers, "We knew what we were doing," at least on paper. A mainstream historical fact surfaces as you study the blueprint. During the 20th century's great infrastructure boom, think the interstate highway system of the 1950s and 60s, design-build teams moved fast because political momentum and funding streams stayed aligned. By contrast, modern megaprojects struggle under layers of regulation, oversight, environmental review, and interagency coordination. The field office around you embodies that evolution, modern ambition slowed by modern caution. You move into the adjoining room, where a long corkboard still clings to one wall, its surface punctured with the ghosts of hundreds of pushpins. Faded memos and laminated notices remain tacked in place. One sheet reads, "Weekly safety briefing, canceled until further notice." Another displays a checklist of daily tasks, equipment logs, dust control, concrete batch timings. Each item is weighted by an unspoken assumption that the next day's work would always arrive. On the floor beneath the board lies a binder with the spine broken. You kneel and open it. Inside is a collection of correspondence, emails printed for review, annotated in different colored pens. You read a few of them, tracing the rising tension between engineering consultants and state officials. One email thread questions whether the floodplain calculations were accurate. Another disputes traffic volume projections submitted by a subcontractor. A third, almost poetic in its frustration, ends with, "We need clarity before committing further resources." Experts still debate whether these disagreements were symptoms or causes of the project's downfall. Some scholars insist that the engineering assessments were solid but sabotaged by political second-guessing. Others maintain that the technical foundation itself was shaky. Premature estimates, inconsistent soil samples, and overly optimistic cost curves. Still others argue that the greatest flaw wasn't technical at all, but organizational. Too many agencies, too many consultants, too many voices competing for authority. You find a phone sitting on one desk, its cord curled like a sleeping snake. You lift the receiver. Silence. The last message light blinked itself to death long ago. On the desk beside it rests a stack of progress reports, each stamped with dates that span the project's final, anxious months. You flip through them. The language shifts subtly from confident to cautious to pleading. Mitigation ongoing. Awaiting updated directive. Contingencies under review. By the final pages, the tone is unmistakable, a slow collective realization that momentum had slipped beyond retrieval. A quirky detail catches your eye, a tiny rubber figurine of a superhero, cape torn, one arm missing, stands vigil at the edge of a monitor. Someone once kept it here for luck, a totem of perseverance in a world built on uncertainties. The figure leans precariously now, as though exhausted by the very optimism it once symbolized. You move to the back of the field office, stepping around fallen ceiling tiles and a pile of abandoned safety manuals. A drafting table sits angled toward a window, its surface covered with trace paper sketches. You hold one sheet up to the light. It shows a refined curve adjustment for a segment of the corridor, a subtle reroute to avoid a small wetland. Not many people knew the project team fought hard to protect that wetland. It's a lesser-known footnote buried in environmental appendix pages that few outside the team ever read. But standing here, the detail feels strangely important, a reminder that even doomed megaprojects contain moments of genuine care. Outside, a gust of wind nudges the office door, making it thud softly in the frame. You step back into the sunlight. The second office, farther down the row, waits with an open door and broken blinds swinging listlessly. A whiteboard inside still shows a half-erased equation, Q, HAND, KIA. It refers to groundwater flow, something the geotechnical team obsessed over. You imagine them debating angle of repose, infiltration rates, the uncertainty of clay pockets. Their voices might have filled this very room, overlapping in a mixture of expertise and fatigue. Another wry observation floats in. The more a mega project tries to predict the Earth beneath it, the more the Earth seems to enjoy surprising everyone involved. Behind the offices, you find a contractor's break area, picnic tables gone soft with rot, a rusted grill, a collection of hard hat stickers left in a cracked Tupperware container. One sticker reads, "I survived Phase 1." The irony hits quietly. You step beyond the offices, following a rutted path leading toward the next segment of stalled construction. The field office buildings shrink behind you until they look like little metal boxes sinking into the weeds. Their emptiness lingers with you, a reminder that before structures fail, it is usually trust that collapses first. Blueprints without builders are just stories without storytellers. But the impressions remain, waiting for someone, anyone, to walk through and understand what was once attempted here. You continue on, the air warming, the path narrowing, the next abandoned fragment calling you forward. You follow the narrow service path winding away from the field offices until it merges with an old county road, faded centerline, cracked asphalt, dandelions taking root along the seams. The air shifts as you leave the administrative quiet behind and step into a place where the consequences of stalled ambition live in plain sight. Ahead lies a bypass town, small enough that you can see its main street from where you stand. The buildings look tired but proud, as if holding themselves upright out of stubbornness rather than strength. You enter on foot, passing a weather-beaten sign that once promised economic revival. New corridor coming soon. Someone has scrawled beneath it in careful block letters, "We're still waiting." The words have faded, but the sting hasn't. This was one of the communities that built its hopes around the Megaproject you've been following. A town told that new lanes of traffic would bring customers, jobs, and energy. Instead, progress stopped a few miles away, leaving only the echo of a promise. Your boots click softly against the sidewalk as you walk deeper into the main street. Storefronts line the block, a diner with a chipped teal facade, a darkened hardware store, a vacant pharmacy with paper still taped over the windows. A few doors down, a beauty salon sign swings gently in the breeze, its once bright lettering now the color of old postage stamps. You glance inside and see a row of dusty chairs facing a wall of mirrors that reflect only the dim afternoon light. A wry thought surfaces. Towns don't close all at once. They dim gradually, like overhead lights losing voltage. You turn toward the diner, the one place on the street that appears open. A red neon sign flickers in the window, fighting valiantly against daylight. Coffee, pies, open. When you step inside, a small bell gives a half-hearted jingle. The air smells of warm sugar, frying bacon, and a hint of citrus cleaner. A waitress, gray hair tied back in a bun, glances up from wiping the counter. There's a practiced warmth in her smile, the kind that survives economic downturns. "Sit anywhere," she says. You choose a booth near the window where you can watch the empty street. There are only two other customers, an older man stirring a cup of black coffee like it owes him an explanation, and a woman reading a paperback with frayed edges. Their presence adds a quiet rhythm to the room, the kind of everyday persistence that keeps small towns alive long after prosperity has wandered elsewhere. The waitress brings you a mug and a plate of pie without asking what you'd like. "Best thing we've got today," she says with a shrug. The crust is golden, the filling sweet and tart. You nod your thanks, and she smiles again. Tired, but genuine. This town didn't shrink because of any single decision, you remind yourself. A mainstream historical fact anchors that thought. Many rural communities across America experienced economic decline during the late 20th and early 21st centuries due to shifting industries, automation, and the consolidation of retail and manufacturing. Highways were often sold as lifelines, routes that would funnel opportunity where markets no longer flowed naturally. The promise of the corridor was meant to reverse that trend here. Landowners bought new signage, the diner expanded its kitchen, and a local developer even drafted plans for a travel plaza to catch the predicted wave of pass-through traffic. But the survey stakes out in the forest never grew into pavement. The interchange never connected. The project froze in legislative limbo, and the corridor map became nothing more than a dotted line in a forgotten binder. The waitress refills your coffee and leans against the counter. "We had a festival for it, you know," she says, nodding toward the town square outside. "The Welcome Corridor Festival had banners, a little parade, even a mascot costume shaped like a highway shield." She chuckles softly, shaking her head. "Kids loved it. The adults, well, we tried to believe hard enough for them." A quirky detail. For 3 consecutive years, the town crowned a corridor king and queen, a tradition invented entirely for marketing purposes. The crowns were made of cardboard, spray-painted gold, and decorated with construction paper road stripes. Photos of the winners used to hang in the town hall until humidity curled the edges beyond salvation. A few locals still bring up the tradition with equal parts affection and embarrassment. You finish your coffee and step back onto the street. A breeze carries a faint hint of fresh-cut grass from somewhere behind the grocery store, now permanently shuttered. As you walk, you notice a community bulletin board outside the former pharmacy. Most of the flyers have yellowed, but one stands out. Town Hall Meeting. Project Update. The date is from a decade ago. Beneath it, someone scribbled in red pen, "Nothing new. Not this time." Experts still debate whether towns like this were misled by optimistic forecasting or simply caught in the crossfire of political shifts. Some argue that the economic models exaggerated expected benefits. Others believe the benefits would have materialized if only the project had continued. Your steps fall in rhythm with those unresolved arguments, echoing against the worn brick walls. You turn onto a side street lined with modest homes, porches with creaking swings, peeling paint, plastic tricycles tipped against railings. A dog barks behind a fence, tail wagging in hopeful half circles. You glance at the horizon where the unfinished corridor cuts a shallow scar through the distant hills. It looks deceptively close, as if the town could reach out and pull it the rest of the way. Another wry observation forms. When a mega project stalls, the distance between almost and never becomes immeasurable. At the end of the block, you reach the town square. Once a lively gathering spot, it's quiet now except for a single flag flapping against its pole. The bandstand stands empty, its paint sun-cracked, the floorboards warped. You step onto the platform and look around. A few benches circle the square, their slats broken in places. On one bench sits an elderly man wearing suspenders and a cap embroidered with a faded tractor logo. He watches you with a nod of recognition, even though he's never seen you before. "Corridor brought you here, didn't it?" he says, without preamble. You acknowledge him, and he taps his cane against the wooden boards. "We used to think it would save this place. Thought it would bring jobs, travelers, maybe even keep the kids from moving away." His gaze drifts toward the diner. Some of us still hold out hope. Most don't. You sit beside him, listening as he recounts stories of the early days, the survey crews who set up camp in the fields, the town council celebrating every incremental approval, the sudden hush that followed the funding freeze. He talks about his daughter who left for the city, about the mechanic's shop that closed after 40 years, about the strange mixture of optimism and resentment that lingers in town hall even now. Funny thing, he says, hope doesn't vanish. It just moves slower. You thank him and rise. As you leave the square, the breeze stirs fallen leaves into a small whirlwind, spinning them in a moment of unexpected grace. The sight lingers with you as you walk toward the edge of town, where the road narrows into a rural two-lane. Ahead lies another fragment of the stalled Megaproject, the next unfinished chapter waiting for your footsteps. Communities left waiting never truly stop listening for the sound of engines that might one day return. You carry that quiet yearning with you as you follow the fading lines out of town. You leave the quiet town behind, following the winding county road as it narrows into a rough access lane carved decades ago for construction vehicles. The morning sun slips behind gathering clouds, muting the colors around you. Ahead, rising from the landscape like the rib cage of a giant creature, stands a skeletal rail viaduct, an unfinished spine of concrete piers and half-laid beams that was once meant to carry high-speed trains across the valley. From a distance, it looks deceptively graceful. Up close, it feels like standing beneath the bones of a dream too heavy to lift. You approach the first pillar. Its surface is pocked from years of rain, faint streaks of rust trailing down like the marks of fingers that once tried to climb. The viaduct was supposed to be the region's leap into modern transit, a project born from the national push in the early 2010s to invest in high-speed rail. A mainstream historical fact anchors your step. Federal stimulus funding during that era poured billions into rail proposals nationwide, but only a fraction of the envisioned network ever materialized. This viaduct was one of the casualties of shifting priorities, budget overhangs, and the harsh arithmetic of upkeep. You place a hand on the concrete, it's cool, slightly damp, and textured like pumice. Above, an unfinished segment juts into midair, ending abruptly where the next beam should have locked into place. A few rebars poke out at the edge, their ends capped with faded orange safety protectors. They resemble the broken strings of a harp, humming silently under the weight of years. A wry thought stirs. Nothing looks more confident than a half-built megastructure. Nothing looks more embarrassed than one that never finished. You walk along the gravel path beneath the elevated line. Tall grasses sway where maintenance trucks once idled. Every few yards you come across a stack of unused track ties, composite blocks that were supposed to be bolted onto rail beds. Some have moss growing across them now, their dark surfaces softened by time. Nearby sits a rusted forklift, its forks half raised as though frozen in a gesture of resignation. A quirky detail emerges as you step past a cluster of storage crates. Inside one, still sealed in plastic, lies a promotional banner from the viaduct's groundbreaking ceremony. It features sleek renderings of white trains streaking across a finished rail line, accompanied by a slogan in bold blue letters. The future arrives fast. You brush dust from the corner of the crate. The irony doesn't need speaking. As you climb toward the service stairs attached to one of the pillars, your hand slips across a metal railing cold enough to make you shiver. Each rung of the stair trembles lightly beneath your weight, but holds. Halfway up, the view opens dramatically. You pause. The valley stretches outward like a slow exhale. Patchwork fields, clusters of trees, and the distant silhouette of the town you just left behind. Above this landscape, The unfinished rail line floats like a stubborn idea, refusing to descend back to earth. A wind picks up, flowing along the length of the viaduct with a hollow moan. The sound vibrates through your feet as you step onto the elevated platform where beams were meant to be laid. Here, the surface is wider, flattened, prepared for the bedding layer that was never poured. You notice faint chalk lines marking the alignment of future tracks, still visible despite the weather. Someone drew a tiny smiley face beside one of the measurement points, an engineer's offhand attempt to lighten a tedious day. As you walk, your footsteps echo strangely, light at times, metallic at others, depending on the structure beneath. You move from pier to pier, each one spaced with mathematical precision. The precision stands in stark contrast to the fractured narrative that halted construction. Experts still debate whether environmental regulation changes or funding disputes dealt the decisive blow. Federal planners insisted the environmental review process had grown more complicated than expected. State officials countered that cost inflation made the original budget projections laughable. Meanwhile, transit scholars argue over whether high-speed rail ever made economic sense in regions without dense urban clusters. The scholarly debate floats around you like invisible weather, arguments overlapping, reshaping themselves, making the truth feel less like a line and more like a field of shifting coordinates. At the midpoint of the viaduct you reach a gap, a full 30-foot void between segments. The concrete edge slopes downward slightly, the exposed rebar reaching out like fingers trying to grasp what never arrived. You stop and stare across the missing span. On the far side sits a row of neatly aligned anchor bolts, untouched, awaiting the beam that never came. The space between the two edges hums with potential energy, an inhale never released. Another wry observation nudges its way in. This is the closest a megaproject ever comes to metaphor. Two ends built with certainty, neither quite making it far enough. You retreat from the gap and move toward a set of maintenance sheds beneath the viaduct's midpoint. You descend a ladder, boots scraping against metal, until you reach a small concrete pad at ground level. The sheds are locked, but gaps in their siding reveal glimpses inside. Crates of fasteners, sealed drums labeled rail bonding adhesive, and an unopened first aid kit still shrink-wrapped. A laminated safety chart tacked inside shows a list of heat stress prevention tips. Irrelevant now, except to the spiders that spun webs over it. You walk deeper into the valley, following the alignment as it gradually descends toward what would have been a major rail junction. The land here has reclaimed much of the cleared ground, though the faint path of the rail bed remains, gravel mixed with weeds, compacted dirt resisting erosion. It's like a shadow of a track that never existed. A small pond lies to your right, formed unintentionally when graded land collected rainwater. Dragonflies hover above its surface. A hand-painted sign nearby reads, "Future Wetland Mitigation Area." Its playful lettering makes you pause. This was where environmental engineers planned to compensate for habitat disruption elsewhere along the corridor, a requirement shaped by federal conservation laws. A lesser-known detail buried in an appendix. The project team actually developed one of the region's most innovative amphibian relocation studies here. A team of graduate students spent a summer counting salamanders at night with tiny headlamps, mapping where they migrated. You imagine their surprise years later when the project froze and their research became a footnote in an unfinished narrative. Clouds gather overhead, turning the light a muted silver. You walk along the edge of the abandoned pond, the air thick with the earthy scent of damp soil and budding reeds. The viaduct towers behind you, gray against gray, like an enormous sketch someone forgot to finish. Several yards ahead, you reach the base of the valley's largest pillar, wider, taller, more intricately reinforced than the others. A plaque mounted on a temporary post still stands near its footing. Phase 2 begins here. The lettering is crisp, startlingly intact. It feels like a monument to a future that never came. A few feet beyond, an overturned bucket holds a faded clipboard with plastic sheets curling at the corners. Inside are handwritten notes from a site supervisor, daily logs that track deliveries, weather conditions, equipment breakdowns. On one page, a note reads, "Beam delivery delayed, revised estimate pending." Underneath, in a different handwriting, someone added, "Don't hold your breath. You breathe in the stillness. The valley, the viaduct, the half-made rail line all exist in a strange, suspended state, neither relic nor promise." You step away slowly, feeling the weight of unfinished ambition settle around you like quiet fog. The skeletal structure above whispers of speed that never came, of ambition outrun by arithmetic, of a nation both eager and hesitant to leap forward. As you continue along the trail tracing the viaduct's path, the rails that never were stretch out before you like a question the country has not yet learned how to answer. You leave the valley of the skeletal rail line and follow a service road that twists toward the hills, narrowing as it rises. The gravel under your boots crunches like faint static. Ahead, the landscape slopes upward into a seam in the earth, an opening partially concealed by brush, metal fencing, and a warning sign so faded the letters look like old ghosts. Tunnel access, authorized personnel only. The fence gate has sagged open, its lock long rusted through. Beyond it, a concrete portal yawns like a great unfinished mouth, dark and cool even in the midday light. This is where the Megaproject burrowed into the hillside. This is where ambition met geology, bureaucracy, and brute physical resistance. This is where the story grows heavier. As you approach the entrance, the temperature drops noticeably. The air carries that unmistakable scent of subterranean places, cold stone, damp dust, faint mineral tang. A thin mist lingers just inside the mouth of the tunnel like breath that never dissipated. You take a step into the darkness, and the world narrows to the rhythm of your footsteps, each one tapping lightly against concrete overlaid with grit. A wry thought flickers through your mind. Tunnels always promise shortcuts, but they rarely come cheap. Your eyes adjust gradually. Emergency lighting strips once mounted along the walls now hang loose, their bulbs shattered or missing. Graffiti, sprayed in neon colors, sprawls across one section of wall. One drawing shows a cartoon mole in a construction vest, holding a pickaxe, smiling proudly. The mole is surrounded by jagged speech bubbles that read, "Dig fast" or "Dig forever." You can't help but smile at the defiant absurdity of it. Farther in, scattered equipment lies abandoned, a cracked hard hat, a mud-stained glove, a stack of concrete aggregate bags hardened into lumps. Water drips in slow, rhythmic beats from the ceiling into puddles below, creating ripples that distort the flickering beam of the light you carry. The sound echoes ahead, making the tunnel seem alive, breathing, thinking, waiting. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Throughout the early 21st century, tunnel projects across the U.S. faced mounting challenges due to stricter environmental regulations aging utility networks, and the soaring costs of relocating underground infrastructure. This hillside was no exception. During preliminary boring, crews encountered unexpected pockets of unstable shale, fragile layers that splintered under pressure, forcing engineers to redesign entire sections. Progress slowed, then slowed again, then nearly halted. Your footsteps lead you to a point where the tunnel curves slightly left. Here, a cluster of machinery forms a kind of industrial graveyard. A drilling rig coated in dust, its metal arms locked mid-motion, a ventilation fan with a bent blade, piles of wire mesh meant to reinforce the tunnel walls. One generator has a faded tag attached, scribbled with a date from years ago, and the initials of a technician who never returned for it. Scholars still dispute whether the geological surprise or the shifting regulatory standards caused the ultimate collapse of this phase. Some argue the shale discovery fundamentally undermined the engineering assumptions. Others insist environmental compliance, specifically new groundwater protection rules, made the construction timeline nearly impossible to maintain. And then there are those who claim the real issue was political. Leaders lost interest, funding evaporated, and the tunnel became collateral damage in a larger battle for control of infrastructure spending. Your light drifts across the ceiling, illuminating metal bolts protruding from the rock. Some hang by a thread, their resin anchors leached loose by water seepage. The seepage itself glints in faint silvery streaks, winding down the curvature of the wall like hurried handwriting. You catch one droplet in your hand. It's icy, cold enough to make you wince. A quirky detail reveals itself when you crouch near a pile of abandoned equipment crates. Inside one crate, buried beneath old schematics and dust-caked drill bits, you find a small collection of hand-carved wooden figurines. They depict various tunnel animals, moles, foxes, owls, some wearing miniature hard hats. Someone on the crew must have whittled them during breaks. You imagine the laughter they sparked, the brief moments of levity deep underground, before the project's weight pressed down again. As you continue deeper, the tunnel grows narrower. This section was still in its early excavation phase. The walls transition from reinforced concrete to raw stone, rough and uncut, scored with the scratch marks of machinery. Here, the air feels heavier. You can hear faint echoes not of dripping water, but of your own breath bouncing back at you, as though the space is inhaling your presence. You pause at a large steel door hanging crooked on its hinges. Above it, a peeling sign reads, Zone 3, Water Control. Beyond the door lies a cavern-like chamber littered with pipes, coiled hoses, and several empty barrels labeled groundwater holding. The barrels tilt at odd angles coated in a film of dust. One has a dent shaped like the heel of a boot, maybe from a frustrated kick when pumps failed or when timelines slipped yet again. A wry observation whispers through your thoughts. Megaprojects don't drown in water. They drown in paperwork about water. Standing in this chamber, you feel the strange intimacy of unfinished spaces. The tunnel is neither alive nor dead, just paused. Paused in a way that feels almost disrespectful to the human effort poured into every drilled hole, every bolted plate, every sleepless night spent recalculating structural loads. You press on. The floor slopes gently upward until it reaches a spot where excavation simply stops. The tunnel face, the last active frontier of the project, looms before you, a jagged semicircle carved into bedrock, its edges dark with moisture. Wooden supports brace the wall like exhausted arms. A single drill head still protrudes from the rock, locked in a permanent state of almost. Abandoned chalk markings remain on the stone. Stabilize here, seam fractured, retest core samples. The handwriting varies, a mix of confident strokes and hurried scrawls. You run your fingers across the chalk. It smudges easily, yet somehow feels permanent. You kneel and examine a pile of sample cores stacked neatly to one side. Each cylinder shows layers of sediment, light, dark, mixed, telling a geological history far older than the project's ambitions. This valley has been forming itself for millennia. Humans attempted to cut through it in a matter of years. The Earth had other ideas. As you rise, you notice a small metal box bolted to the wall. Its lid hangs open. Inside lies a bundle of papers sealed in plastic. You pull them out carefully. They're log entries from the final week of excavation. Short, practical notes. Pressure stable. Shift 2, delayed for safety check. Recalibrate sensors tomorrow. The last entry reads, waiting for updated directive. You fold the papers back into their pouch and return them to their box. Something about the care with which someone preserved them feels quietly symbolic, a gesture of defiance against the uncertainty swallowing the project. When you finally turn back toward the tunnel entrance, your footsteps feel louder, as if the walls are reluctant to let you leave. You follow the path you took earlier, moving toward the thin sliver of daylight that grows brighter with each step. As you emerge from the hillside, blinking into the afternoon sun, the air feels strangely warm, almost startling. You look back at the tunnel mouth, at the dark interior now shrinking behind you. The unfinished passage seems to watch you leave, holding its breath, storing its stories in the cold silence of stone. Tunnels toward nowhere are never truly empty. They contain the echoes of ambition, the hum of machines long still, the marks of hands that tried to carve the future into rock. And they hold the lingering question of what might have been, one that follows you now as you walk back into the light, toward the next fragment waiting in the landscape. You leave the tunnel behind, feeling the sudden warmth settle across your shoulders as you descend the hillside. The terrain opens into a long, broken highway corridor, patched earth, scattered rubble, and the stilled arteries of what was supposed to be a multi-state connector. The sky has shifted to a pale, diluted blue, the kind that makes abandoned landscapes feel even more exposed. Ahead, the corridor stretches in a wavering line, its unfinished lanes interrupted by soil mounds, barricades, and the silent choreography of half-constructed overpasses. This is where politics rewrote the map. You step onto the flattened earth where the new highway alignment was supposed to begin. The ground is packed hard from decades-old bulldozer tracks, now fossilized into patterns like ancient tectonic scars. A row of survey flags still marks the intended median, most frayed, some snapped off entirely. Those that survive flutter weakly in the wind, their once bright colors now the hue of diluted tea. A wry observation surfaces. If hope has a physical form, it's probably plastic survey tape, persistent, weathered, and always pretending the next phase is just one meeting away. You follow the faded flags toward the remnants of a construction zone where a set of concrete pillars stands in uneven intervals. These supports were meant to lift the corridor over an existing state route, uniting two transportation networks into a seamless whole. Instead, the pillars now resemble chess pieces left mid-game. No strategy, no opponent, just stalled intentions. The political battles that shaped this stretch were fierce, and you can feel their residue in the air. A mainstream historical fact anchors the conflict. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, the tug-of-war between state and federal authority over infrastructure spending intensified nationwide. Governors clashed with legislators. Federal agencies fought local referendums. Highway projects died or mutated depending on election cycles more than engineering logic. This corridor was struck squarely in that crossfire. You continue forward past a set of barrier walls stacked neatly but never deployed. They're chalk-marked with cryptic shorthand: R12, Shift 4, Westbound Phase, the administrative tattoos of a project mid-transformation. A faded bulletin board leans against one of the walls, its laminated notices warped by sun and rain. One paper reads, Proposed Route Option 3B. Public comments invited, featuring 3 lines scribbled over the printed map. Someone, years ago, circled a section and wrote, This alignment splits my family's farm. No. You exhale slowly. That comment, multiplied by hundreds across the region, reshaped everything here. As you walk, you hear the soft crunch of gravel shifting under your boots. You follow the corridor into a clearing where a temporary construction trailer once stood. All that remains is its rectangular outline on the ground. Dust, sun bleaching, and a few bolts protruding from the soil like fossilized teeth. A scrap of metal lies nearby, stamped with the name of a subcontractor that went bankrupt just months after the project's first halt. You pick up the metal scrap. It's light, almost flimsy. It surprises you how fragile the traces of megaprojects become once human momentum evaporates. A low hum of wind moves across the corridor as you approach a ridge offering a view of the landscape below. From this vantage point, you can see the original intended path, a graceful curve carved through farmland, then rising toward a distant county line. You also see the alternative alignment, the one introduced when political factions favored rerouting the corridor to satisfy a different district. That debate dragged on for years, splitting loyalties, budgets, and eventually the project itself. Experts still argue over whether that political fight was unavoidable or entirely manufactured. Some scholars claim the realignment proposals were necessary to avoid environmental obstacles. Others insist the shift was purely political, an attempt to funnel development toward constituencies favored by newly elected officials. A third camp argues the battle became symbolic of the nation's fragmented planning system, where no single entity can hold a vision steady long enough to see it through. Their debate feels alive in the corridor's broken geometry, as though the land itself remembers every contested line. You descend the ridge and approach a section of partially completed embankment. The dirt here rises steeply, reinforced with geogrid that still pokes through in slanted synthetic sheets. Grass has colonized most of it, creating a patchwork of green and black. To one side, an excavator bucket lies half buried, its teeth jutting from the soil like relics of a long-extinct creature. Nearby, you find a sign toppled face down. You flip it over and read, Future Interchange, Phase 1B. The graphic shows looping ramps and directional arrows, all designed with the clean confidence of a PowerPoint slide. You brush dirt from the edges. The optimism on the sign feels almost cruel now. A quirky detail catches your eye. Someone, not workers, not officials, has planted a row of sunflowers along the corridor's edge. They stand surprisingly tall, facing the sun with stubborn cheer. A laminated tag tied to one of the stalks reads, For everyone who waited. You pause, struck by the quiet tenderness of the gesture. The roadbed stretches forward into a shallow valley where the corridor abruptly bends, a bend never approved, never justified, never built to any engineering standard. It's a scar left by one of the proposed reroutes, documented in drafts, but never formalized. For a brief period, surveyors marked this altered path with colored stakes. When the original alignment was reinstated, the stakes remained, contradictions embedded in the soil. You walk between them now. The stakes form a confused geometry. Some point north, others east. A few are toppled, their color-coded tips still visible beneath the weight of fallen leaves. They feel like the physical embodiment of arguments lingering long after meetings adjourned. A wry whisper threads through your thoughts. Maps may be drawn in ink, but politics redraws them in pencil. You step onto a raised platform where a concrete test pour remains. Engineers often create these mock slabs to study curing patterns, aggregate distribution, or surface wear. This one still displays faint tool marks and the boot prints of a worker who walked across it too soon. The impressions look fresh, as if the person stepped away just moments before you arrived. Beyond the platform stands the corridor's most striking relic, a massive steel girder resting on temporary supports, never lifted into final position. Its dark frame cuts across the sky at an angle, bold, heavy, undeniably strong, and yet utterly displaced. You walk beneath it, feeling its enormous shadow wash over you. Its bolts gleam faintly in the afternoon light, untouched by the forces they were designed to resist. You place a hand on the girder. It's warm from the sun, humming faintly with the heat of the day. In that warmth is a memory of the hands that built it. Fabricators, welders, inspectors, each one believing their work would soon be part of something greater. You continue down the corridor's unfinished length until it meets a dead end, a berm of dirt that was supposed to be carved away during the next excavation phase. Tire tracks fossilized in hardened mud climb partway up the berm, but stop abruptly, as if the vehicle simply vanished. You stand at the edge, breathing in the scent of dust and faint wildflowers. The air is quiet, heavy with the weight of decisions made far from here, decisions that altered the lives of thousands who never stepped foot on this corridor. When politics rewrites a map, it also rewrites the people living along its lines. You turn away from the berm and begin following the faint path leading toward the next abandoned structure in the Megaprojects' long, fractured chain. The corridor narrows, bends, then disappears between distant hills like a sentence left unfinished. You follow the narrowing corridor until it dissolves into a gravel track, the tire ruts fading into soft earth. The sky darkens slightly, clouds collecting like an audience preparing for an overdue performance. Ahead, the land dips into a wide basin filled with the remnants of what was once the Megaprojects' flagship construction yard. From a distance, the place looks almost alive, as if the machinery might still whir to life at any moment. But as you walk closer, you see the truth. Everything here is frozen mid-action, like a diorama of interrupted ambition. The first thing you notice is the crane, a towering lattice of steel, its boom angled skyward with the posture of someone raising a hand to ask a question that never got answered. Its cables sway lazily in the wind, clinking against the frame with a rhythmic metallic chatter. Rust freckles the joints. The driver's cab is empty, a thermos still visible inside, mirroring the one you saw back at the river bridge. Weeks turned to years, yet the tools remain exactly where human hands last left them. A wry thought flickers in. The easiest way to timestamp a stalled megaproject is to count the forgotten thermoses. You step deeper into the yard, boots crunching on a carpet of gravel, metal shavings, and the brittle remains of safety cones that have collapsed into sun-bleached shards. Stacks of rebar cages sit nearby, perfect cylinders awaiting installation, each one a portrait of meticulous assembly. Their symmetry steals your breath for a moment. They were meant to reinforce pillars, walls, and retaining structures across miles of planned roadway. Instead, they stand in rows like silent choir members preparing to sing a hymn no one ever cued. A mainstream historical fact anchors your steps. By the early 2010s, construction delays had become so common across large-scale American infrastructure projects that many state departments of transportation carried multi-year backlogs. In some regions, the average delay for environmental clearance alone doubled over a decade. These structural slowdowns, not just political or financial obstacles, created yards just like this one nationwide, each filled with good intentions that had nowhere to go. A forklift sits tilted to one side near a mound of gravel, its forks planted in the ground like the roots of an iron tree. You walk around it and notice a small clipboard wedged behind the seat. The top sheet is a delivery log with the final entry reading, "Reinforcement batch delayed again. New ETA pending." Below it, someone scrawled in pencil, "Put it on the pile with the other delays." The humor is dry, almost painfully so. Another wry observation drifts in uninvited. People who pour concrete for a living often have the best sarcasm. Crossing the yard, you spot an open equipment shed. The siding has peeled away in strips, but the roof holds. Inside, sunlight filters through gaps like thin golden ladders extending from the rafters to the dusty floor. Rows of tools and spare parts remain exactly where they were stored. Wrenches, couplings, bolts, mangled extension cords. A chalkboard near the back wall still displays a list of tasks in messy handwriting. Pour retaining wall base, prep soil tests, beam delivery sometime. The triple question marks feel less like punctuation and more like prophecy. You pause at a stack of wooden pallets holding bags of cement, each bag hardened into a rock-solid mass. They resemble fossils of their former function. You tap one gently and hear a dull thud. Cement, meant to build foundations, has instead become a monument to stillness. Experts still disagree whether delays like these originate from project complexity or pure mismanagement. Some scholars claim that megaprojects, by definition, expand until they collapse under their own weight. That complexity, not human error, is the primary culprit. Others argue mismanagement is the silent saboteur, pointing to shifting timelines, over-optimistic cost projections, and inconsistent oversight. A third school of thought maintains that externalities, lawsuits, land disputes, regulatory resets play the decisive role, turning even well-managed sites into battlegrounds of conflicting demands. You walk through the yard absorbing each perspective, the echoes of debate blending with the hollow clatter of stray metal in the wind. A quirky detail catches your eye as you approach the far end of the yard. A half-finished lunchbox sits on a sawhorse, the lid popped open. Inside, wrapped in a waxed paper pouch, lies a fossilized sandwich, a geological artifact of workplace haste. Someone, on the day the crew was told to pause operations, must have set it down intending to return within the hour. That hour became a cliff face of uncertainty. Beside the lunchbox lies a deck of playing cards, scattered in a loose fan. Several cards show caricatures of construction equipment, a cartoon dump truck flexing muscles, an anthropomorphic jackhammer wearing sunglasses. You imagine the crew passing time during unpredictable delays, shuffling, dealing, waiting for direction that never came. You walk toward a large rectangular trench near the center of the site. This was supposed to be the foundation for a major retaining wall. The trench is now filled with rainwater, forming a reflective pool broken only by reeds growing along the edges. You crouch at the side and see your reflection ripple in the surface. Around the edges, measurement stakes still poke out, each labeled in faded marker. 5 FT grade, verify slope, rebar tie-in here. Their instructions suspended between intention and abandonment. Across the trench, a bulldozer rests with its blade partially lowered, frozen in mid-scoop. It looks like it was caught in the act, caught between the push of progress and the pull of interruption. The operator's cabin door stands open, revealing a baseball cap on the dashboard and a pair of safety glasses hanging from a hook. The scene feels startlingly intimate, as though you've stepped into someone's paused afternoon. A wry observation escapes into your thoughts. Megaprojects don't fail like explosions. They fail like unfinished sentences. To the east, you spot a cluster of tall forms covered in heavy tarps. The tarps billow slightly in the breeze, revealing glimpses of what lies beneath: curved steel plates, boxed girders, segments of precast panels. You lift a corner of one tarp. Beneath it lies a beam segment stamped with bold lettering: Lot 7, do not install until final approval. That approval never came. You continue your loop around the yard and discover a small mobile office trailer still perched on concrete blocks. The steps have collapsed, but the door swings open under your hand. Inside, the walls are plastered with charts, timetables, and sticky notes, most curling with humidity. A large calendar on the wall is frozen on a month several years ago. Days are crossed out until the third Wednesday, then blank from that point forward. You trace the abrupt end with your finger. Even time stopped participating. On one desk sits a half-complete cost projection spreadsheet. Numbers fill the first 9 columns. The 10th is blank. A sticky note attached to the monitor reads, "Meeting rescheduled, Friday." But there was no Friday, only silence. As you exit the trailer, you notice a final detail tucked behind the structure: a wildlife camera mounted on a fence post, long dead. Beneath it, a laminated sign reads, "Please do not disturb local habitats during construction." Ironically, the pause in construction created new habitats the project never accounted for. Rabbits dart across the yard. A hawk circles overhead. Nature, apparently, kept its own schedule. You walk to the highest point in the yard, a mound of gravel that gives you a view of the entire basin. From here, the site looks like a stage set awaiting actors who never arrived. Beams, tools, vehicles, materials, all present, all inert, a frozen symphony. The project that ate a decade didn't swallow time all at once. It nibbled at it, meeting by meeting, delay by delay, until the entire yard became a museum of incomplete intentions. You turn away from the vista, the wind brushing past you like a reminder to keep moving. Ahead lies another fragment of this long, fractured story: rusted rebar, abandoned towers, and the ghosts of decisions waiting in the distance. You descend the mound and walk forward, stepping out of the construction yard's suspended time and into whatever the landscape reveals next. You follow a gravel access road that slopes upward toward a ridge, the construction yard shrinking behind you until it becomes a scatter of metallic glints swallowed by distance. As you crest the hill, the rusted silhouette of an observation tower rises into view, an unfinished lookout meant to offer engineers and inspectors a panoramic view of the emerging corridor. Now it stands alone, skeletal and stubborn, its steel frame oxidized into a deep reddish brown. The structure juts into the sky like a question, unresolved and quietly accusatory. The wind grows stronger here. It whistles through the cross bracing, producing a thin, wavering note that shifts as you move. You place a hand on one of the support beams. The metal is rough, gritty, with corrosion. A single bolt drops somewhere above, pinging off a girder, the sound echoing long after it falls. It seems like the tower is clearing its throat, preparing to speak. A wry observation rises with the wind. America doesn't build ruins intentionally, but it's getting awfully good at leaving them behind. You begin your ascent up the tower's grated staircase. Each step vibrates faintly, but the structure holds. It was engineered to last far longer than this unfinished chapter allowed. Halfway up, you pause to look back at the basin below. From here, the construction yard appears almost orderly. Cranes frozen mid-motion, materials arranged in geometric rows, machines posed like actors awaiting stage directions. But distance softens chaos. The closer you get to Megaprojects, the more their fractures reveal themselves. You continue climbing. Rust clusters along the inner rails like reddish lichen. A safety sign screwed to a post reads, "Caution, high winds possible." The edges have curled and half the letters have faded, giving it the tone of a politely delivered threat. Near the top platform, you notice something unexpected, a bird's nest tucked between two beams. Inside, twigs, bits of frayed plastic, and a lone soda tab glinting like a misplaced jewel. A quirky detail, but one that says more than it seems. Wildlife adapts quickly, even to our unfinished ambitions. A small feather flutters near your boot, caught in the wind. You gently brush it aside. When you reach the observation deck, the world opens. The elevation gives you a sweeping view of the failed corridor, ribbons of dirt and half-paved lanes stretching toward the horizon, interrupted by abrupt drops, unfinished embankments, and the disjointed architecture of stalled progress. You can see the tunnel mouth from here, a dark oval in the hillside. The skeletal viaduct arches faintly in the distance like a stone spine. The town sits even farther off, a patch of modest geometry surrounded by farmland. This high vantage point exposes the megaproject not as a sequence of failures, but as a single, enormous pause, its pieces scattered across the land like artifacts from a lost civilization. The wind buffets the platform, making the cables hum. You grip the railing, steadying yourself. Below, you spot a series of bright orange objects scattered across the slope. At first, you think they're traffic barrels, but as you look more closely, you realize they're wildlife deterrents, plastic owls installed to keep birds away from the tower's danger zones. Most have toppled. A few gape up at you with blank, molded eyes. One hangs upside down from a cable, spinning lazily in the breeze. Another wry moment arrives. Nothing looks quite as defeated as a toppled plastic owl. You turn toward the small equipment shed attached to the tower's upper level. The door hangs open, swinging gently with each gust. You step inside. The space smells of cold metal, old paper, and faint mildew. A folding table holds several binders, their covers warped. You flip one open. Inside are environmental impact documents, detailed tables outlining noise projections, air quality assessments, and soil contamination precautions. These were the scientific underpinnings meant to shield the project from legal challenges. Instead, they became evidence in lawsuits that dragged on for years. A mainstream historical fact anchors your reading. By the early 2010s, litigation related to environmental permitting had become a primary cause of construction delays across the United States. Highway and transit projects frequently found themselves entangled in multi-year legal battles over wetlands, species protection, and community displacement. This project got swept into that wave, one lawsuit contesting its air quality modeling, another challenging the fairness of its property acquisition strategy, and yet another disputing its noise projections near rural homes. You leaf through a stack of reports. A handwritten note on one page reads, "Numbers revised again. Schedule slipping." Another page has a sticky note attached, "Final hearing next month. Prepare counterarguments." But the hearing, like so much else, never concluded. You sit on a dusty crate and glance around the shed. A cracked whiteboard hangs crookedly on one wall. Someone once sketched a rough diagram of the corridor, but the marker has faded into near invisibility. Only faint lines remain, like the ghost of a plan. Below it, a small corkboard holds business cards pinned haphazardly, consultants, environmental monitors, lawyers. A few cards list phone numbers with area codes that suggest distant offices, experts flown in for assessments that ultimately led nowhere. Experts still debate whether the environmental hurdles were genuine or strategically amplified. Some scholars argue the project underestimated ecological sensitivities from the outset. Others maintain that environmental concerns became leverage in political battles unrelated to the land itself. Still others point to the project's ballooning cost estimates, asserting that environmental reviews merely slowed a collapse already in progress. Their disputes carry an academic detachment, but here, standing amid rust and wind, the consequences feel tangible. Leaving the shed, you step back onto the platform and look outward again. The wind tugs at your clothes. You rest your hands on the railing, the metal vibrating faintly beneath your palms. From this height, the rusted rebar scattered across the hillside catches your attention. Jagged lengths jutting from unfinished retaining walls. Some pieces are bent from freeze-thaw cycles. Others stand at perfect right angles, like exclamation points, demanding explanations that never came. You descend the stairs slowly, each step ringing softly. At the base, you find an overturned wheelbarrow with a small pool of rainwater collected inside. Tiny ripples form where droplets fall from a sagging tarp overhead. The reflection on the water surface shows a warped image of the tower, tall, angular, defiant. The ripples distort it further, making it appear as though the structure is swaying gently with the wind. Another wry observation crosses your mind. Even reflections refuse to hold still around abandoned megaprojects. You move beyond the tower, down a slope where rebar tumbles out of the earth like metallic vines. This area once housed the early stages of a major retaining wall system designed to stabilize the hillside. But the work stalled in mid-reinforcement, leaving exposed steel to weather and rust. You brush your hand across one length of rebar. It leaves a faint reddish stain on your skin. To your left, a narrow access road curves away, bordered by mounds of construction fill. A makeshift sign sticks out of the dirt, its ink nearly erased. Retaining Wall Section D on hold. The phrase "on hold" feels like an understatement after so many years. Scattered amid the steel, you notice something moving. At first, you think it's a piece of tarp caught in the breeze. But then it hops. A rabbit, its fur mottled gray and brown, emerges from behind a mass of rebar, pauses, and regards you with mild curiosity. It twitches its ears once, then disappears beneath the steel again. Another quirky detail: abandoned megaprojects often become unexpectedly rich wildlife sanctuaries. Rust, dust, and silence make perfect shelter. You continue downward until the tower vanishes behind the slope, replaced by the soft hum of the wind and the irregular shapes of half-finished earthworks ahead. Regret clings to this place. Regret in rebar and rust, in paused structures and long-forgotten paperwork. But regret also softens with time, becoming part of the landscape rather than a wound upon it. You stand at the edge of the excavated path and take one last look at the tower's silhouette, barely visible through the trees. Then you turn toward the next stretch of stalled construction waiting to reveal its stories. You follow a quiet service road curling away from the rusted tower, your footsteps muffled by thin layers of dust and blown soil. The corridor bends, then rises onto a narrow plateau where a cluster of low buildings sits behind a chain-link fence. The gate is twisted open, the padlock long since snapped. Beyond it, a faded sign hangs crookedly on two rust-streaked bolts. Regional Planning Lab. Access restricted. The lettering is peeling, the seal of the transportation agency cracked down the middle. This is where the megaproject once lived on paper, long after it stalled in the field, where analysts, planners, and data technicians tried to salvage its logic through spreadsheets, forecasts, and endless modeling. These rooms once held the heartbeat of decision-making. Now they echo with dust. You step through the doorway of the first building. The interior is dim, lit only by a few stubborn beams of sunlight slipping through slats in the blinds. A row of cubicles stretches before you. Faded fabric walls, toppled office chairs, old computer monitors that resemble fossilized technology. Thin cobwebs stretch between the partitions like delicate architectural revisions. The air smells faintly of old paper in disuse, with an undercurrent of dry electronics, the ghost scent of machines long powered down. A wry observation arrives uninvited. Even the future can get dusty if it sits still long enough. You walk deeper, passing desks cluttered with abandoned objects, cracked calculators, dried highlighters, a stress ball shaped like a tiny traffic cone. A wall calendar near the entrance remains frozen on a month years past, its pages stuck together, its dates marked with notes about meetings that never happened. The handwriting grows more frantic as the month progresses, then stops completely. To your right, a glass-walled conference room holds a long table covered with drafts, maps, and thick binders. You push the door open. It squeals softly, announcing your arrival to the empty space. Inside, large planning maps are pinned to corkboards. Many are curling at the edges, their color-coded lines fading. One map shows the full megaproject alignment, with arrows, nodes, traffic estimates, and tiny icons representing future interchanges. The optimistic typography leaps from the page. Projected completion, 2018. Another map displays an alternative route promoted during the realignment battles. A third shows projected freight volumes through the corridor, numbers that now feel fictional. A binder lies open on the table. You skim its contents: regression models, economic forecasts, projected job creation figures. The models rely heavily on assumptions, that became obsolete almost as soon as they were written. Fuel prices, population growth, regional freight demand. You can see where analysts tried to revise the numbers, penciling in new values, striking out old curves with hurried strokes. A mainstream historical fact emerges as you flip through the pages. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, transportation planning across the United States increasingly depended on complex forecasting models that struggled to anticipate volatile economic changes. Recessions, demographic shifts, and unpredictable freight patterns routinely undermined long-term projections. Many megaprojects, including this one, were birthed from models overly optimistic about demand and insufficiently cautious about cost. You move toward another desk where a stack of printouts lists traffic simulations, tiny animated arrows representing cars flowing through junctions that were never built. A sticky note attached to one simulation frame reads, "Recalibrate for Scenario 4. Again." The word "again" is underlined twice. You turn to the server room, its door propped open by a discarded binder. Inside, racks of climate-controlled machines stand silent. Their indicator lights are dark. Thick cables snake across the floor like petrified vines. On one shelf sits a portable hard drive labeled Baseline Models. Do not remove. Dust has settled in a thick, complacent layer across its surface. Nearby you find a cardboard box filled with USB drives, dozens of them, some labeled by hand, others anonymous. One reads, "Historic Freight Scenarios. Final?" The question mark feels painfully honest. A quirky detail emerges as you dig deeper. A small toy train sits atop a stack of external drives. It's a cheerful model, a bright blue locomotive pulling tiny silver cars. Someone in the office clearly had a sense of humor about working on rail and highway simulations. The train is coated in dust, but somehow still manages to look hopeful. You return to the main room and notice a bulletin board labeled Data Requests Pending. Underneath are pinned slips of paper bearing abbreviated notes. Update crash dataset. Need revised flood modeling. Rerun row impacts. Most have exclamation marks or question marks scrawled beside them. A few have been stamped canceled. As you scan the board, you hear a faint flutter. A loose sheet on a nearby desk shifts in a stray breeze. You pick it up. It's an internal memo summarizing disagreements between analysts and policymakers. One line stands out. "We have too many models and not enough truth." The sentence is underlined as if someone planned to revisit it. Experts still debate how much unreliable data undermined megaprojects like this one. Some argue early projections were fundamentally flawed, based on outdated assumptions, unrealistic expectations, or political pressure to present best-case scenarios. Others maintain the data was sound, but politicians cherry-picked results that suited their agenda. Still others insist the models weren't the issue at all. It was the shifting policy environment that skewed the numbers beyond recognition. The scholarly debate drifts around you like motes of dust, each particle containing a fragment of blame. You walk into the next building where a long room holds drafting tables arranged in rows. Here, the planning lab's creative side once lived. Large format printers rest silent at the back of the room, their paper trays empty. Several tablets lie dormant, screens cracked or blackened. Rolls of topographic maps lean in a corner as though waiting for hands strong enough to unroll them again. On one drafting table, a half-finished diagram catches your eye. It shows a complicated interchange design, a hybrid of cloverleaf, flyover, and directional ramps. The lines are drawn with precise confidence, but the paper is torn midway through the sheet. The tear bisects one ramp, creating a jagged absence where a smooth curve should be. The image feels symbolic. Another table holds a topographic map pinned with colored markers. Each marker corresponds to a construction phase. The earliest phases are pinned neatly. Later phases look chaotic, with markers rearranged, crossed out, or clustered in desperate clusters. Someone has written unworkable as drawn, revisit elevations in the margin. A wry whisper returns. When too many people revise a plan, it stops being a plan and becomes an obituary. You exit the drafting room and follow a hallway into what appears to be a break area. The microwave's door hangs open. A faded poster on the wall encourages teamwork with a photo of hikers summiting a mountain. The caption reads, "Together we can build anything." The irony almost chokes you. On a counter sits a mug with the words, "Data never lies," printed on the side. A crack splits the ceramic down the middle. You carry the mug to the window and look out. From here, you can see several pieces of the corridor. Broken alignment, overpasses halted mid-rise. Patches of cleared earth now softened by weeds. The planning lab was supposed to bring coherence to this landscape. Instead, it became a warehouse of contradictions. As you set the mug down, your gaze catches a final detail. A rolled-up blackout curtain tucked behind a filing cabinet. Its label reads, "Projection Room. Do not remove." You pull it out and unroll it. On one edge is a tiny handwritten note. "For community meeting, don't forget the laser pointer." You feel the ache of it. Those community meetings, those promises, those presentations were meant to keep hope alive. Instead, they became annual rituals of delayed explanations. Ghosts in the data linger here. Projections, debates, abandoned analyses. You step back from the window and walk toward the exit. The planning lab falls into darkness behind you, its machines silent, its truths unresolved. Ahead, the corridor continues. Broken ground, broken trust, waiting for your next steps. You leave the planning lab behind, its rooms still humming faintly in memory with half-erased models, broken forecasts, and debates that outlive their usefulness. The air outside feels warmer, drier. Sunlight filtering through a thin haze as you walk along a gravel path carved by construction vehicles years ago. Ahead, the land begins to level into a broad plaza of cracked concrete, bordered by remnants of orange fencing and brittle weeds. You recognize the place instantly, even if you've never been here before. This is where the groundbreaking ceremonies happened. This is where speeches were made, golden shovels lifted, ribbon-cutting scissors gleamed. Now it's a cracked ceremonial plaza, an empty stage where optimism once stood, now warped by heat and time. You step onto the concrete, it buckles under your feet in slight, uneven shifts. A faded banner frame rises nearby, empty now, its horizontal bar shaped like an archway to nowhere. Rust flakes off in your palm when you touch it. The faint smell of hot asphalt mingles with the dusty scent of dormant earth. A wry observation surfaces. Even the celebrations of megaprojects age faster than the megaprojects themselves. You spot a plaque half hidden beneath a layer of wind-blown grit. You kneel to brush it clean. The inscription reads, "Community Partnership Plaza, dedicated to regional unity and shared progress." The date is nearly 2 decades old. Below it, names of state and local leaders are etched in metal. Many of them forgotten politicians who rode the project's early promises straight into election campaigns, and sometimes straight out of office. You stand and walk toward the center of the plaza, where a circular depression marks the spot where a ceremonial mound of soil once stood. During the groundbreaking, school children lined up along its perimeter, waving miniature flags. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. In the mid-2000s, infrastructure projects routinely staged elaborate public ceremonies to generate momentum and civic buy-in. Local news stations covered them. Regional papers devoted entire sections to them. Those events fed community pride and, unintentionally, later resentment. You can almost hear the echoes of applause, the scratch of microphone feedback, the exaggerated optimism of leaders declaring the project a new dawn for the region. Their voices dissipated long ago, leaving only the dull hum of wind passing between broken railings. You move toward the plaza's far edge, where a set of wooden benches sits under a metal shade structure. The benches are weathered, their slats warped. You notice carvings in the wood, initials, dates, a few random declarations of affection or irritation. One carving reads, "We were promised better." Another simply, "When?" Past the benches, the plaza narrows into a walkway lined with informational kiosks, faded murals depicting the bright future the project was supposed to deliver. You run your fingers along one panel, showing sleek highways, landscaped medians, and digitally animated traffic smoothly flowing in precise lanes. The colors have washed out. Cracks form jagged lines across the idealized roads. A cartoon family waving from a minivan now looks ghostly, distorted. As you trace the fractured graphics, a lesser-known detail surfaces. This plaza was built before major construction began, not out of necessity, but because community leaders demanded a visible symbol of progress. The plaza cost over $1 million, funded by grants meant to bolster public enthusiasm. Critics called it a monument to a highway that doesn't exist. Supporters said it would help the region believe in itself. The truth, as always, sits somewhere between. You continue along the walkway and reach a small amphitheater, a semicircle of stone seating facing a low platform. Grass grows between the stones, softening the hard geometry. A microphone stand still juts from the platform like a lone stalk. A discarded program booklet lies nearby, its pages stiff with rain. Community Forum, project update. You pick it up. Inside are bullet points that now read like satire. Phase 1 near completion and expected acceleration, pending final approvals. Someone scribbled in the margin, "They said that last year." Experts still debate why community trust around megaprojects collapses so quickly. Some argue it's the mismatch between public expectations and engineering reality. Others point to the disproportionate impact delays have on small towns where every postponed promise feels like a personal slight. Some scholars even suggest the mere presence of ceremonial spaces, like the one you're standing in, intensifies disappointment when progress stalls. People gather here, invest belief here, and return here only to find stillness. A soft rustling behind you interrupts your thoughts. You turn to see a figure approaching, the gait slow but sure. An older woman, wearing hiking boots and carrying a canvas satchel, steps onto the plaza. Her hair, tied loosely at the back, lifts in the breeze. She looks at you with a curious, cautious expression, the kind of look locals give to strangers wandering through the bones of their story. "You here for the project?" she asks, her voice measured and steady. You nod, and she gestures toward one of the benches. You sit together in the dappled shade. She introduces herself simply as Marlene. No last name offered, none needed. I used to be the loud one, she says, tapping her satchel. Ran the community advocacy group for nearly 10 years. We thought if we shouted loud enough, someone would listen. She unzips the satchel and pulls out a stack of folded petitions, their edges frayed. She holds them carefully, like fragile relics. We wanted transparency, updates, a seat at the table. Her smile is thin. What we got was reports written in language no one outside an engineering PhD could understand. You listen as she recounts the struggle. Public meetings filled with rising tempers, elected officials dodging questions, consultants presenting revised timelines with more caution each year. She describes neighbors who lost land during early acquisitions, promised prompt compensation and relocation support that arrived inconsistently at best. Some families waited months for updates. Others waited years. Trust is easy to break, she says quietly. Hard to rebuild. Her voice carries the weight of someone who still believes accountability matters, even when the system proves resistant to it. A quirky detail slips into her story. During one particularly tense town hall, she showed up wearing construction ear protectors, not to block out noise, but as a tongue-in-cheek reminder that the community was tired of not being heard. People laughed. Officials didn't. She tells you about the final meeting she organized, the one with more empty chairs than attendees. Folks had given up by then, she says. The ones who stayed weren't angry anymore, just tired. The plaza around you feels heavier now, as though absorbing her memories into its cracked foundations. You ask her why she still visits. Because something happened here, she says, gesturing toward the plaza, the walkway, the abandoned kiosks. People tried. They believed. And even if the project didn't keep its promises, that hope mattered, still does. She stands, pulling her satchel onto her shoulder. If you're walking the project, keep going north. There's one last structure, an old conference center. They held the big negotiation there before everything sputtered out. You thank her, and she nods once before turning down a narrow path, disappearing into the brush like she's done this countless times. You take a final look at the cracked ceremonial plaza, the benches, the mural kiosks, the empty platform. Broken ground, broken trust. Yet echoes of hope still linger here, faint but persistent. You step off the plaza and begin walking toward the distant shape Marlene described. The landscape narrows into a corridor of trees, and the next segment of the Megaproject rises somewhere ahead, waiting with its own unresolved story. You move north along the narrow tree-lined path, the cracked ceremonial plaza shrinking behind you until it becomes just another scar in the landscape. The air cools as clouds gather overhead, muting the sun into a pale disk. Before long, the trees part to reveal a massive structure resting in a shallow depression at the base of a ridge. A conference center, broad, low, and windowed, its once modern architecture now dulled by neglect. You approach slowly. The building's facade, once a polished mixture of glass and steel, has surrendered its sheen. Vines crawl up one corner. Several window panes have fractured into webs of spidery cracks. Near the entrance, a toppled sandwich board sign lies half buried in leaves. You brush dirt from its surface. The letters appear in faded blue. Regional Negotiation Summit. Welcome delegates. A wry observation rises unbidden. Even the word welcome feels like a relic now, a gesture the project forgot how to make. The main doors are unlocked, their hinges complaining as you push them open. Inside, the air is stale and cool. The foyer floor is scattered with dried leaves blown in through cracks. A large banner still hangs from the ceiling. Moving forward together, its edges tremble slightly in the draft from the door like a tired flag. You take a few steps into the lobby. The silence has texture, layered, expectant, unsettled. Ahead, a hallway branches into several conference rooms. Most of their doors are ajar, their interiors dark. You enter the largest one, guided by instinct more than light. This was the room where the last major negotiation took place, the meeting that was supposed to resolve disputes among contractors, planners, agency officials, and community leaders. The meeting that changed nothing. Rows of chairs still face the front of the room, though many have toppled or been pushed aside. A long conference table sits at the center like an abandoned battlefield. Scattered across it are binders, name placards, half-empty water bottles, and paper agendas with curled edges. You pick up one agenda. The first item reads, Revised Funding Allocation Proposal. The second, Mitigation Responsibilities. The third, circled several times, is simply Timeline. A mainstream historical fact echoes in memory. In the 2010s and early 2020s, infrastructure projects across the U.S. increasingly relied on multi-agency collaboration. Yet these collaborations often stalled because no single stakeholder held ultimate authority. Without centralized leadership, megaprojects became vulnerable to jurisdictional stalemates, long meetings that produced long conflicts but short progress. You take a step closer to the table. The name placards reveal a dissonant mix. State officials, federal liaisons, engineering consultants, community advocates, environmental monitors. One placard reads, Chairperson in bold black letters, slightly bent. Beside it lies a thick binder labeled Final Consensus Draft. You open it. The first page contains 11 bullet points. 6 are crossed out. 3 have comments arguing against revisions. 2 are untouched. You can feel the emotional residue of that last meeting lingering here. Clashing interpretations, raised voices, forced smiles, long silences. Someone once described the session as a polite collapse. The phrase fits. As you explore the room, you notice a cluster of flip charts along the wall. Some pages are blank. Others display hand-drawn diagrams, flowcharts of responsibilities, cost-sharing grids, environmental mitigation cycles. One chart shows a sketch of the entire corridor with bright red X's marking disputed sections. A note at the bottom reads, Return to geotech for new core samples. Another scribble beneath it contradicts the first. Samples already outdated need full redesign. The ink has bled in places, twisting the words into tangled shapes. Yet the frustration remains legible. You cross to the corner where a small stack of folding chairs leans against the wall. One chair has a neon sticker slapped across the back. I was there. You tilt your head, trying to decide whether it was placed with pride or sarcasm. A quirky detail emerges when you flip the chair over. Someone has taped a small fortune cookie slip beneath the seat. The message reads, A difficult road leads to a beautiful destination. The irony is almost too on the nose. You move to a side table where a projector sits covered in dust. Its lens is cracked. A remote lies beside it, button labels worn off. You press one out of curiosity. Nothing happens. A stack of USB drives in a bowl nearby suggests that dozens of presentations were prepared for that final summit. Slideshows packed with charts, recommendations, revised cost estimates, alternative alignments, planned clarity that never landed. Experts still debate whether that last meeting could have changed anything at all. Some argue the project was already doomed, financially unsalvageable, politically radioactive. Others believe a deal was possible if only a few contingencies had aligned: renewed federal funding, concessions from key stakeholders, or a compromise on environmental mitigation. A third school of thought insists the meeting failed because each participant carried a different version of the project's purpose. Without shared intent, consensus becomes a mirage. You spot a small door at the back of the conference hall. Curious, you push it open and step into a storage room filled with stacked chairs, broken extension cords, and crates of unused lanyards labeled Delegate. You pick one up. The plastic sleeve is cloudy, but still contains a blank name card. The emptiness of the card feels like a gentle, painful joke. This conference welcomed everyone and no one. You notice a corkboard on the wall. It holds a single sheet of paper pinned dead center. The title reads, Negotiation Debrief. Internal Notes. You draw closer. Handwritten comments fill the page. Discussion circular. Stakeholders unwilling to shift positions. Funding gaps remain unresolved. Community advocates feel unheard. Engineering estimates disputed again. No consensus reached. At the bottom, in faint penmanship, reschedule, TBD. You return to the main conference hall. Your gaze drifts upward to the ceiling tiles. One is missing, revealing tangled wiring above. You imagine the soundscape of that final meeting: chairs scraping, papers shuffling, forced politeness dissolving into thinly veiled exasperation. Someone tapping a pen, someone raising their voice, someone calming the room, someone walking out. A wry observation surfaces. Meetings rarely end megaprojects, but they often outlive them. You sit in one of the surviving chairs and absorb the stillness. The walls feel heavy with words spoken and unspoken. Negotiation is supposed to be a process of movement, yet here it became a gravity well, pulling energy in, giving none back. After several minutes, you rise and walk toward the large windows lining the far wall. You wipe away grime with your sleeve. Outside, you see the corridor stretching north, its broken fragments scattered like a trail of forgotten intentions. That fractured landscape reflects faintly in the window's surface. So does your silhouette. You turn from the glass, guided now by the instinct that your path continues beyond this building. As you exit the conference hall, you notice a final detail near the door, something taped to the inside of the frame. It's a handwritten note on lined paper. Don't forget why this matters. No signature, just the words. You carry them with you as you step back into the daylight. The air feels thicker now, charged with the complicated weight of all that happened, and all that failed to happen, in that final meeting. Ahead, the corridor bends once more, leading toward a cluster of industrial structures half hidden beyond the ridge. The next story waits there, dreams packed away, stored, and maybe lost. You start walking. You follow the corridor as it curves gently around the base of the ridge, the conference center receding behind you like a fading echo of raised voices and unresolved tension. The landscape widens again, flattening into a broad industrial plateau bordered by chain-link fences leaning at tired angles. Ahead, a series of squat warehouse buildings emerge, rectangular silhouettes against a pale sky, their corrugated metal siding dulled by years of wind and sun. These are the storage facilities where everything that never made it into the ground, onto the viaduct, or through the tunnel was packed away. Dreams in storage? The air smells distinctly industrial as you approach, a blend of old oil, dust, and sun-warmed metal. The first warehouse door stands partly open, held in place by a cinder block. You slip through the gap, stepping from afternoon brightness into cool, shadow-thick interior. Your eyes adjust to dim light that filters through cracked skylights. Rows of shelving stretch into the distance, each stacked with unused materials, concrete formwork panels, metal conduits, unopened pallets of bolts, rolls of geotextile fabric still bound in plastic. Everything here was meant to be transformed, to be installed, embedded, fastened, or poured. Instead, it's suspended in a permanent prelude. A wry observation rises. Nothing looks quite as melancholic as brand new materials that never got to do their job. You move slowly through the warehouse aisles. The silence is deep but not empty. It carries the faint aura of expectation, like a breath held too long. At the end of one aisle, you spot a bundle of steel beams strapped tightly together. Their surfaces gleam faintly. These pieces were fabricated more recently than the others. You run your fingers along the smooth metal. No rust yet. No weathering. They waited for installation, but installation never waited for them. Above the shelving, hand-painted labels mark different sections. Phase 1, materials, storm drainage components, rail infrastructure, signage hardware. The neatness feels almost eerie, preserved long after the project's structure and funding fell apart. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. During major infrastructure delays in the late 2000s and 2010s, states often warehoused millions of dollars worth of unused materials. Some of those materials sat untouched for years, too specialized to repurpose, too expensive to discard, too uncertain to deploy elsewhere. This warehouse mirrors those stories, an archive of indecision. As you move deeper inside, the arrangement becomes more chaotic. Pallets sit askew. Crates lie half open. A forklift rests abandoned with its tines lifted slightly off the ground, caught in a half-breath as though the driver expected to return from break at any moment. You crouch beside an open crate labeled Illumination Fixtures. Do not install until final certification. Inside lie dozens of streetlight heads, wrapped meticulously in protective foam. One sits on top, unwrapped, its aluminum skin unblemished. You tilt it gently. The fixture catches the dim light and throws a faint glint into the air. A quirky detail emerges. Someone placed a tiny plastic action figure inside the crate, an orange-vested construction hero giving a thumbs up. It's perched atop a fixture as if supervising the warehouse. The unexpected cheerfulness nearly startles a laugh out of you. You rise and move toward a partially walled-off corner of the warehouse. A sign reads, Archival Storage. Handle with care. Inside this area, shelves hold binders, rolled plans, and sealed cardboard boxes. You open one box. It contains project-branded merchandise, brochures, keychains, even small foam stress balls shaped like road signs. Promotional items printed before momentum died. Another box holds stacks of glossy posters showing the completed corridor. Sunny skies, flowing traffic, distant horizons. A region united, one slogan declares. You let the poster slip back into the box. Here, optimism has weight. Experts still debate whether warehoused materials like these should ever be used. Some scholars argue it's wasteful not to deploy components if a project revives. Others insist technological standards evolve too quickly. By the time revival becomes possible, the materials may be obsolete. A third group suggests salvaging everything for entirely different projects, an idea municipalities often pursue only to discover specialized materials don't fit generic needs. You step through a side door into a second warehouse, larger and more cluttered than the first. This one houses the oversized items, segments of precast retaining walls, culvert pipes the diameter of small cars, enormous spools of fiber optic conduit. The air feels heavier here, saturated with the accumulated presence of industrial mass. In one corner, a pile of unused signage leans against the wall. Overhead guide signs, speed limit panels, reflective markers. You brush the dust from one panel. It reads North Corridor Expressway with an arrow pointing into blank space. The panel was ready for installation. The route it announces never came to be. Nearby stands a third warehouse, its door locked but the window beside it broken. Through the gap, you can see stacks of materials still wrapped in their original shipping plastic. These crates are labeled critical components. Do not store outdoors. Yet here they sit, boxed in a building no one has entered for years. You circle around to a loading bay, where an old delivery truck remains parked in position. Its back door is half open, revealing a shipment of high-strength fasteners still strapped to the pallets. You climb up into the truck. Dust coats the floor in a thick layer. You brush off a clipboard affixed to the wall. The last entry on its freight log reads, "Partial unload. Hold until next directive." That directive never arrived. Stepping out of the truck, you pause to breathe in the warm air. Then follow a row of loading docks toward an office at the end of the facility. Inside, the space smells like paper and stale coffee. On a desk sits a radio, the antenna bent, the battery compartment empty. A whiteboard on the wall bears a list of inventories. Many items read reconciled, others pending, still others TBD. Someone drew a smiley face beside a particularly tedious inventory category. Galvanized washers. The smiley face seems exhausted. A worn swivel chair sits at the desk. You lower yourself into it, listening to the faint squeak that escapes from its joints. Papers clutter the tabletop, equipment checklists, storage conditions, depreciation calculations. One sheet lists salvage estimates in 3 columns labeled optimistic, realistic, and conservative. All 3 values are crossed out. Another wry thought drifts in. A warehouse is the closest thing a failed megaproject ever has to a memory palace. Organized, quiet, and painfully honest. As you sift through the papers, a folder slips loose and falls open on the floor. Inside are letters from local organizations requesting leftover materials for community use, steel beams for a pedestrian bridge, concrete blocks for a park barrier, electrical conduit for a vocational training program. Many requests received the same response, stamped in red. Under review, hold pending final decision. But the final decision never came. You rise and move toward the back exit of the office. The door opens to a large outdoor yard where more materials lie in semi-orderly rows. Drainage grates, jersey barriers, stacks of protective fencing, pallets of reflective studs. The studs glitter faintly in the sunlight, tiny diamonds of intention scattered across a sea of grass and gravel. Near the far fence, you notice a rusted cargo container sitting slightly crooked. You approach and tug its door open. Inside are old project archives, binders, correspondence folders, rolled plans. One folder draws your attention. Decommissioning scenarios. You leaf through its contents. The scenarios include options for salvaging materials, demolishing incomplete structures, repurposing corridors for recreation trails, or offering parcels for private development. Each scenario has notes scribbled in the margins, contradictions, uncertainties, unanswered questions. Experts still dispute whether revival or demolition is the wiser path forward for projects like this. Some argue restarting construction, though expensive, would unlock long-promised economic benefits. Others insist that demolition would end the financial drain and allow communities to move on. A growing minority proposes adaptive reuse, turning failed corridors into greenways, solar arrays, or regional trails. No consensus exists. You step out of the container and look across the yard. Sunlight reflects off metal edges, grass rustles, a lone bird circles overhead. The materials around you seem to exhale, a quiet, patient breath. They have waited longer than steel and concrete were designed to wait. You walk toward the warehouse exit, following the gravel path as it bends toward the horizon. Behind you, the stored dreams remain sealed in their crates, stacked in neat rows, quietly deteriorating. Ahead, the faint outline of the corridor's last stretch emerges, your path pulling you toward dawn, toward reckoning, toward whatever hope remains. Dreams in storage linger like questions, and now you're walking toward the answers. You leave the warehouse district behind, following a faint construction line carved into the earth like a sentence the Megaproject never finished writing. The gravel crunches under your boots, softer here, as if time has worn even the sound smooth. The afternoon light shifts toward evening, tinting everything with a warm amber glow that settles over the landscape. Ahead lies the final fragment, a stretch of graded earth tapering into untouched fields, the official end of the corridor that never became a corridor. You pause at the boundary, where engineered land gives way to wild growth. A row of wooden stakes marks the spot, each wrapped with tattered tape once color-coded to indicate phases and alignments. Now the colors have faded to pale neutrals. They flutter in the breeze like tired flags signaling a truce no one remembers agreeing to. A wry observation slips through your thoughts. In abandoned megaprojects, even the flags surrender long before the people do. You move forward, walking between the stakes along a shallow depression where the roadway subbase was meant to be poured. Grass sprigs poke through the gravel, wildflowers speckle the edges in bright yellows and purples. The engineered grade still holds, smooth, uniform, unmistakably deliberate, but nature is reclaiming it in soft increments. The two forces coexist here, not in conflict, but in a kind of weary detente. A historical reminder flickers. In earlier eras of American infrastructure, especially mid-century, projects often proceeded with ruthless consistency once begun. Public works carried political inertia strong enough to override objections. But in the 21st century, the process fractured. Scholars still debate whether the shift represented progress in accountability or a catastrophic loss of national cohesion. You've walked through the evidence. Oversight grew, caution deepened, consensus shattered, and megaprojects slowed until they stalled. Ahead, the land opens into a broad, grassy mesa where a temporary survey station once stood. You can tell by the shallow impressions left in the dirt, square, precise, the ghost of a platform that once held leveling equipment, laptops, and mugs of coffee growing cold in morning air. You stop at the site, letting the wind brush against your face. On the ground lies a single survey marker disc, still pressed into the soil. You kneel to examine it. The metal is tarnished, its etched lettering barely legible. Someone marked the elevation in faded red pencil. a gesture of professional confidence mixed with human practicality. You run your fingertips lightly over the numbers. This marker was supposed to anchor a whole network of alignments. Now it anchors memory. You stand again, moving toward a rise at the edge of the mesa. From there, you can see rows of distant hills glowing gold in the descending light. The corridor was supposed to reach them, spanning through this stretch, bridging these valleys, connecting towns that waited too long. Instead, progress reached this ridge and stopped, like a runner slowing to a halt mid-stride. At the top of the rise sits a field office trailer, smaller than the ones you saw earlier, almost an afterthought. Its siding has peeled away, revealing insulating foam beneath. A piece of paper is still taped to the door, its ink nearly erased by the sun. Final field notes. Do not remove. Curiosity nudges you inside. The trailer smells of stale air, paper, and faint mildew. A single metal chair sits beside a fold-out table covered with maps, coffee-stained printouts, and a dry erase board propped against the wall. The board holds a half-erased message. Team meeting postponed until further notice. The sentence trails off as if even the writer knew how little meaning the words carried. A binder rests open on the table, its spine cracked. You flipped through the pages. These are the very last entries, the quiet administrative breaths before the Megaproject slipped into suspended animation. One note reads, awaiting updated timeline from leadership. Another, stakeholders requesting clarity. A third, crews reassigned until further guidance. The bureaucratic language feels strangely fragile, a paper shield held against a storm that had already arrived. Experts still argue which moment should be considered the project's true end, the funding freeze, the environmental dispute, the final negotiation, or the day crews stopped returning. But standing here, you sense the truth is more gradual. Projects like this don't end abruptly. They just stop moving, like a great machine whose engine quietly stalls while everyone's back is turned. As you step outside, the sky deepens into orange and rose hues. The wind carries a hint of coolness from the approaching night. You follow the faint construction line further north, letting the landscape unspool before you. The ground grows softer. Gravel gives way to dirt. Dirt gives way to grass. Grass eventually gives way to untouched terrain. The country as it was before survey stakes arrived. You stop where the last marker stands, one more wooden stake wrapped in faded red tape. Beyond it lies only open land. The corridor ends here, not with a structure or a declaration, but with a quiet, unceremonious dissolve. Around you, the world holds stillness, the kind that invites reflection rather than emptiness. This is your final vantage point along the unfinished path. This is where the story begins to turn toward understanding. You breathe in slowly, letting the light settle. And then the narrative shifts, gently, inevitably, into its closing arc. The pacing slows, the evening light deepening around you. The long walk across abandoned spans, forest corridors, half-built interchanges, skeletal viaducts, sealed tunnels, contested mapping lines, cracked plazas, negotiation halls, and silent warehouses threads itself into a single, continuous understanding. Each place carried its own failures, its own human fingerprints, its own echoes of optimism. But here, on this final stretch, you can see how the pieces interlock, not in structural steel, but in meaning. You look back across the landscape and realize you haven't been walking through ruins. You've been walking through ambition, paused, tangled, contested, but never entirely extinguished. The human cost of these mega projects lies not only in dollars wasted or timelines broken, but in trust lost, promises deferred, and communities left waiting in the quiet space between almost and never. And yet, amid rust and regret, there were moments of persistence. A diner still serving pie, sunflowers planted in defiance, a woman carrying petitions in her satchel, graduate students mapping salamanders, surveyors drawing smiley faces beside their measurements, quiet coalitions of resilience. Scholars debate whether America can ever reclaim the boldness of its past infrastructure eras. Some say consensus will always be too fractured. Others argue that collaboration, however slow, is the only sustainable way forward. But standing here, watching the last light soften across the horizon, you sense a different truth emerging. The nation hasn't lost its ambition, it's lost its alignment. But alignment can be rebuilt through transparency that outlasts political cycles, through engineering that honors both earth and people, through planning rooted not in projections alone, but in patience, through communities allowed not just to comment, but to participate. You turn toward the faint trail leading back through the corridor. The air cools, the sky darkens. But something steadier lingers, an understanding that unfinished work isn't failure. It's potential waiting for courage. The long road back isn't simple. It rarely is. But every structure, every town, every quiet corner you passed whispers the same message. The story isn't over. The future begins wherever people decide to build again, with clarity, with humility, with resolve.